All right, everybody, welcome back to the #1 television program in the history of the entire universe. I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, The Blackest Heart, and The Lonesome Crown, all three books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be ranking my top 100 fantasy novels of all time. And, this is going to be a subjective ranking. This is based off of my own history with these books. Different points in time that I read these books that they made a different impact upon me. Your 100 top fantasy novels may vary. They probably will vary. In fact, you're probably going to have a huge disagreement with a lot of the books I put on this list. But that's the way lists are. If you disagree or if you agree, type in the comments your opinions. All opinions are welcome. This list, I will state from the beginning, this is strictly epic fantasy, sword and sorcery, medieval type fantasy. That's why I don't want any comments like, why is there no Harry Dresden? Why is there no Harry Potter? Why was there no Chronicles of Amber? Why was there no this or that? Why was there no Stephen King's Dark Tower? Well, I am telling you, this list is strictly for epic fantasy, sword and sorcery type fantasy. So there's that. Another thing is, in one of my last rankings, when I ranked the top 40 fantasy series of all time, I included my own books in that ranking. I am not going to be including my books in this ranking. I would just like to think that if I had never read my books before, or had never written my books before, if I had stumbled upon them, I would rank them in this top 100 somewhere. I hope. Let's get to it. Let's get to the top 100 fantasy books, in my opinion, of all time. And I am going to start off in high fashion with number 100, and that is book number 1 in Tad Williams' Shadow March series, and it is simply titled Shadow March. Tad is mostly well known for his Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series, and we will get to some of those books later in this countdown. So book number 99 is, we are starting off strong. I mean, The Hobbit, 99. I just listened to the Andy Serkis Audible.com narration of this, and it was bloody brilliant. Okay, number 98 is a newer book that I've read, a newer book that's come out, is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This was a big, epic chunk of a book, and I loved it enough to put in my top 100. And then R.R. Verdi's The First Binding. This is his debut. I think this is one of the better debuts I've ever read. I know it's derivative of a lot of other fantasy novels that have come before. That's fine. Every fantasy novel that I'm going to hold up is derivative of something else. R.R. Verdi, number 97. Actually, R.R. Verdi is a good friend of mine, too, and I've done book signings with him. A decent dude, hardworking dude. Deserves every bit of success he gets. Rules of Ascension, Book 1 in the Winds of the Four Lands by David B. Coe. This is a great book. This probably came out about 20 years ago. Little known fantasy series. Great writer, great story, great book number 1, 5-book series. And then we've got Wrath by John Gwynne. This is the final book in his The Faithful and the Fallen series. I love this series. In fact, my books get compared to John Gwynne a lot. And it's a great comparison. So Wrath, 95. Where are we at? 94. Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. This is book number 1 in his Forgotten Warrior saga. This is just great stuff. Another guy that I've done a lot of book signings with, Larry Correia. Good dude. And then we have 93, The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. These are dope books, and they're in the 90s. Okay. Ken Liu, The Grace of Kings, also published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. This is book number 1 in his Dandelion Dynasty book series. And then we've got The Art of Prophecy by Wesley Chu. This is book number 1 in his The War of Arts saga. This was great. I just read this about 6 months ago. I liked it. And now for a book I read about 30 years ago. The Baker's Boy by J.V. Jones. This is book number 1 in her the Book of Words series. This came out a while back. In fact, you're going to see a lot of books that came out a while back, because I've been reading fantasy novels since, somewhere around the 1800s. All right. Number 90, Shape Changers by Jennifer Robertson. Book number 1 in her Chelsea saga. This started in the mid to early 80s. So it's been a series and a writer that's been around. Kristen Britton's Green Rider comes in at 98. This is another great fantasy novel set by Daw. I've got a lot of Daw books. Daw Books Publishing, I think that's probably the publisher that's going to end up on this list the most. C.J. Cherry, I just read this. This is a quirky fantasy novel. I was not expecting it to be as good as it was. It was just super dope. And this is number 88, Fortress in the Eye of Time. Number 87, my good friend Mercedes Lackey, another person who I've done a lot of book signings with, and her Magic's Price. This is book number 3 in her Harold Mage trilogy. Just got some great LGBTQ themes going through it. Mercedes Lackey, dope. Book number 86, The Wish Song of Shannara by my hero, Terry Brooks. Just a great, this is the 3rd Shannara book he ever wrote. Super dope. And then we've got The One Kingdom by Sean Russell. Now, Sean Russell has written a lot of fantasy novels, and I liked the start of this one. Really good. And it's got a nice, shiny cover. The Jackal of Nar, John Marco. This is kind of an old, forgotten gem from the early 2000s. I think maybe 1998 is when this one came out. Great, sort of grimdark. And then we've got book number 1, The Way of Shadows, in Brent Weeks' Night Angels trilogy. This thing was dope. I read this in one sitting. I loved this book, and the subsequent books too. Now we've got Catherine Kurtz, The Chamber of Culdee. Now, I like all of Catherine Kurtz. I've got like 12 Catherine Kurtz books, and I like them all equally. I just kind of had to think of which one did I really like the most. And I love the start of the Chamber series, so that goes into number 82. Number 81 is Dennis L. McKiernan. A lot of people think that Dennis L. McKiernan is derivative of Tolkien. Well, he makes no apologies about that. He admits that he is derivative Tolkien. And this is anything you read. If you want to read something that sounds and breathes and lives and has world building like Tolkien, give Dennis L. McKiernan a shout out. My favorite is Dragon Doom. Book number 80 is The Black Company by Glenn Cook. And a lot of people, grimdark people, copy this guy's style. Number 79 is The White Dragon by Anne McCaffrey, The Dragon Riders of Pern, one of the greatest book covers of all time by Michael Whelan. And then we've got The Curse of the Mistwrath by Janie Wirtz. I just read this not long ago and loved it. Loved it. It's just so expansive in world building. Almost reminds me of Malazan Book of the Fallen. Janie Wirtz, Curse of the Mistwrath. And then we've got The Sheep Farmer's Daughter by Elizabeth Moon. Great military fantasy about a young girl that goes off like Joan of Arc to join the military. And then we've got The Broken Crown by Michelle West. This is book number 5 or 6 in a big 17-book series, but by Daw Books, and it's great. Kushiel's Dart. I read this one not long ago. Comes in at 75. This was just atmospheric and well written. The prose was fantastic. The Summer Tree, book number 1 in the Fyannavar Tapestry by Guy Gavriel Kay, comes in at 74. It's just the list of books. I just, because it just keeps getting better. Robin Hobb, Ship of Destiny. This is book number 3 in her Live Ship Traders trilogy. One of the greatest fantasy trilogies ever written. We're at, what are we at? 73, and we're already talking about great fantasy 72, another Dragons of Spring Dawning by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. This is Dragon Lance. Oh my gosh, this is, for me, as a kid, I didn't think literature got any better than Dragonlance. And then we've got The Phoenix Guards by Stephen Brust. Coming in at 71, part of his Dragarian series, Vladimir Taltos series. And then one of my nostalgia picks from when I was a kid, The Black Cauldron by Lloyd Alexander, comes in at number 70. Look at that super cool cover. And my fantasy crush, Elanwy, is right there on the cover. And then we've got Sword Dancer. This was my fantasy crush when I was a kid. Sword Dancer by Jennifer Robertson. Another Jennifer Robertson book. This is her book number 1 in her Tiger and Dell series. 2 warrior swordsmen that join together and fight fantasy battles of all stripes. And then we've got Mickey Zucker Reichert's Beyond Ragnarok. I love her Ren Shai books, and this is another one where I love all of them, and I'm like, well, which one did I like the most? Because she's got I got about 9 of her books, maybe 12. This one, Beyond Ragnarok, was my favorite of the group. And then we've got, coming up at 67 is Terry Goodkind, The Stone of Tears. And I know a lot of people don't like this guy or his books, but I'm telling you, in the 90s, yeah, I mean, the Wizard's First Rule was kind of like, but then book 2 is where everybody just started buying these, because this is addictive reading, especially back in the 90s, and I really got it. I think I read about 9 of his. Terry Goodkind, The Stone of Tears, book number 2 in his Sword of Truth series. And then we've got another Tad Williams, The Witchwood Crown. This is book number 1 in his Last King of Austin Ard series, which is the follow-up to A Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And this just keeps getting better and better. The Dragon Reborn, book number 3 in the Wheel of Time, comes in at number 65. I was mesmerized by this book, and it's a 65. And then we've got 64. We've got The Crystal Shard. The first ever introduction of Drist the Dark Elf came in The Crystal Shard. This is a dynamite book, and I've only read about 5 or 6 of these. I'm looking forward to reading the entire 7,000 book series. David Gemmell, Legends. David Gemmell is like the Louis L'Amour of fantasy. He comes in at 63 with Legend, great book. And then one of my favorite new authors is Jay Kristoff. Comes in at number 62 with Nevernight, book number 1 in his, I guess it's the Nevernight trilogy, 62. Oh, and then book number 61 is The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. Another great writer who I am jealous of, just because he writes so good. When I threw that one on the ground and it bent the pages all up. God, that's going to get some comments. And my OCD will skyrocket because I don't like bent pages. Number 60, R. Scott Baker, The Darkness That Comes Before. Oh my gosh, this is like the Dune of when it comes to world building and complex. This is like the Dune of fantasy novels. And then it's pretty serious. And speaking of books that are not serious, Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Ames comes in at number 59. Great debut novel. Everybody loved that one. And then these two go together. 58 and 57. Magician and Magician Master by Raymond E. Feist. Start of his epic Rift War saga. And then we've got book number 2 in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, The Ill-Earth War. Comes in at 56. I like this book because there's a blind character, and I'm going blind myself, so... Robin Hobbs, Ship of Magic, another Live Ship Traders book. This is book number 1. No, is it book number 1? Yeah. Book number 1 in her Live Ship Traders series. It's just great. You're going to see more Robin Hobb coming up. The Burning Stone, Kate Elliott. This is book number 3 in her Crown of Stars series. And it comes in at number 54. Might see more Kate Elliott on the list, too. We've got Melanie Ron, Dragon Prince, book number 2. I love these Dragon Prince books. The world building reminds me of this desert Southwest. That's why I love them so much. And Melanie Ron's a great writer. Then we've got Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Book number 1 in the Mistborn series, coming in at 52. Dope book. And then following right on the heels of that is Dance with Dragons at 51 by George R.R. Martin. Just a dynamite book. Dynamite series. And we're definitely going to see more George R.R. Martin. We've got, coming up here, we've got Fritz Lieber. Swords and Ice Magic is Fafard and the Grey Mouser series, book number 5 or 6. Just dope. Groundbreaking stuff. Black Sun Rising by C.S. Friedman comes in at 49. Great fantasy novel. Silverthorn, another Raymond Feist book. This is probably my favorite Raymond Feist. It's part of the Riftward saga. And then we get another old-time 80s classic, and that's Dawn of Prophecy by David Eddings, book 1 of the Belgariad. I loved that series as a kid. And then we've also got Mirror of Her Dreams by Stephen Donaldson. This is book 1 of More Dance Need. We're going to maybe see more Stephen Donaldson here coming up too. And that's followed up by Patrick Rothfuss, Name of the Wind, at 45. Just one of the greatest debut novels of all time. And then 44 is Empire of the Vampire by J. Kristoff. I know, vampire. This is actually an epic fantasy. This is sword and sorcery fantasy with vampires. And it's spectacular. 43, another new novel. Well, this is another great debut that I love. The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. Super cool book. And then we've got The Claw of the Conciliator by Gene Wolfe coming in at number 42. This is the second book in his Book of the New Sun about the torturer that wanders the world. And then, of course, we've got this great novel, Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson. Book number 1 of Malazan, Book of the Fallen. 41. We're getting into some really cool stuff now. The Great Hunt, book number 2 in the Wheel of Time. I loved book number 1, but it was book number 2 that really sold me and really got me hooked. Coming in at 40. Number 39 is Dragons of Autumn Twilight, book number 1 in the Dragonlance by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. Like I said, this was the epitome of all literature when I was a kid. Book number 38 is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Stormlight Archives, the history. This is the future of fantasy. Just whatever Brandon Sanderson does, that's the future of fantasy. And the Stormlight Archives are brilliant books. And then we go back to Robin Hobb and the Live Ship Traders, and this is book number 2, Mad Ship, coming in at number 37. Robin Hobb, one of the greatest writers of all time. And then Lord Foul's Bane by Stephen Donaldson. A dark, dark book about a conflicted character that has leprosy. And then Sailor on the Seas of Fate by Michael Moorcock. This is the book number 2 in the Elric of Melniboné series, and that's number 35. And then we've got one of my favorites, Elfstones of Shannara by Terry Brooks, coming in at number 34. Everybody thinks that's probably his best book. We'll see if I think it's his best book too. Maybe there's another one. Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. I really loved the way that Brandon Sanderson finished the series, and this is a great book. Okay, this one, I did not think this one would ever, 2 months ago, this one would not have made the list. But I just listened to the Andy Serkis Audible.com narration of this, and it was brilliant. It leapt into my top 100 fantasy books of all time just because of what Andy Serkis did with the story. The Silmarillion, 32, comes in at number 32. Number 31 is The Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin, book number 2 in Game of Thrones. Just absolutely fantastic. I am running out of breath. I got 30 more to go. Book number 30, Stone of Farewell, book number 2 in The Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. I love this book. I anticipated this book's release, and it did not disappoint. Tigana, coming in at 29, Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. A lot of people consider this probably one of the best, if not the best, fantasy book ever written. Then we've got Jerrig, another Stephen Brust. This is one of his Vladimir Taltos books. It was the first one he ever wrote. I still think it's his best. Just a dynamite story. And a great character to follow through 19 books. Conan the Barbarian, book number 1 in the Conan series by Robert E. Howard, book number 27. Conan was very influential to a lot of things. Prince of Dogs, book number, I think this is book number 2 in Kate Elliott's Crown of Stars series. I love this series. It's big, it's epic, it's great. And then we've got Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. This is Grimdark this is the King of Grimdark right here, Prince of Thorns. Great book, great writer. Number 24 is Tad Williams' Empire of Grass. This is book number 2 in his Last King of Austin Ard series. And the cover is just gorgeous. And then we have Patrick Rothfuss, A Wise Man's Fear, coming in at 23. I like this one better than I like the second one better than the first one, as you can tell, because it's ranked higher. That's how rankings work. Thieves' World. I love Thieves' World. And technically not a novel, more of a collection of short stories, but Thieves' World impacted me a lot when as a youngster and as a writer. I love Thieves' World. And then we've got God's Grave, book number 2 in the Nevernight trilogy by J. Kristoff, coming in at number 21. This is probably one of the best book number 2s I've ever read. Now we're getting into, and let me move these over here so I can reach them. We're getting into the top 20. Dragons of Winter Night, Dragonlance number 2. There's a death at the end of this book that gutted me when I was a kid. That's all I'm going to say. Dragon Prince by Melanie Ron, just one of my favorite series of all time, and her first debut novel comes in at number 19 for me. And then we've got Michael Moorcock's The Very First Elric of Melniboné, coming in at number 18. And then at number 17, we of course have some more Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is my favorite Malazan book, Dead House Gates, book number 2 in the Malazan universe, the thingy that Stephen Erickson did. And then book number 16 is Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. Absolutely wonderful book. Wonderful start to a series. And then we've got The Lies of Locke Lamora at 15. Probably one of the funnest books I've ever read. It is absolute gold, dynamite, lit, it's on fire, and it's dope, all rolled into one. And then we've got The Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is my favorite Robin Hobb book. The first one she came out in the Realm of the Elderlings. That's number 14. And then at number 13, of course, we've got Shadow of the Torturer by Gene Wolfe. It's just as literary brilliance. Literary brilliance. I don't know how else to describe it. And then we have another J.R.R. Tolkien, The Two Towers, coming in at number 12. And that's a dope looking cover, if I do say so myself. And then we've also got book 11. It's probably my favorite fantasy book to come out in the last 20 years, and that is Tad Williams' Into the Narrow Dark, book number 3 in his Last King of Ostenard series. And so now we are down to the top 10, my friends. And the stack of the books is over here, and let me pull them over here. So let's get to this top 10. And like I said, the future of fantasy is Brandon Sanderson, and coming in at number 10 is his Wards of Radiance, book number 2 in his Stormlight Archive series. Coming in at number 9 is my favorite Robert Jordan book, and that is The Shadow Rising. This is book number 4 in the Wheel of Time series. Number 8, The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. We are getting down to the nitty-gritty, folks. This is where all of these books are absolute pieces of brilliant literature, especially anything by Guy Gavriel Kay. The Lions of Al-Rassan is my 7th best favorite fantasy novel of all time. Just beautifully written. Every time I read Guy Gavriel Kay, I just think I should just give up writing, because I'll never reach that. I'll never reach what he's doing. A Game of Thrones, book number 1 in the Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin is number 6. Number 5 is The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams, book number 1 in his Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. A book that literally changed my life, changed the trajectory of my life and my writing career, was this one by Tad Williams. But there's a book that even changed my life even more than that, and that was The Sword of Shannara. It was the first ever book that I ever went out and bought with my own money and read and loved as a kid, and I cherish it, and it means so much to me. Sword of Shannara is the 4th greatest fantasy novel ever written, in my opinion. Book number 3, and these 3 could all kind of be tied for first place, but I just kind of ranked them as I ranked them. And book number 3 is The Fellowship of the Ring, of course, by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is the book from which every other fantasy book sprung. and Dungeons and Dragons, too. My second favorite fantasy novel of all time is A Storm of Swords, book number 3 in the Game of Thrones. Absolute perfection. Absolute perfection. From the writing to the story to the characters to the world building to all of it. Perfection. And my number one favorite fantasy book of all time is To Green Angel Tower by Tad Williams. I never anticipated, I mean, this book, I waited for 3 years for this thing to come out, and it was the longest 3 years of my life. It finally came out, and I loved and drank in and absorbed every glorious, gorgeous word that Tad Williams put on the page with this story. This was the culmination of probably my favorite fantasy trilogy of all time, and I absolutely loved it. And it's just a piece of art. And like I said, Tad Williams is a friend of mine too. I've done book signings with him, done panel, and he has signed all of my books. So we will end with the signed copy. And then I will show you this pile of books that we have down here, because I just tossed them all on the floor, which is a disgrace. But I think most of them survived. So anyway, that is my 100 favorite fantasy novels ranked. Leave your comments, whatever you want. If you hate my ranking, that's cool. Rank your own. If you love my ranking, well then, you are a very, very intelligent person.